Hi, this is me Sanjida Akhtar Mim, student ID 375389. In this video, I am going to talk about Duress in contract law using the case of Mrs. Alpha as an example. Contracts are legal agreements and they are only valid when two parties are agree willingly. However, when one party is forced into a contract because of threats or pressure, and this is called duress, and it makes the contract invalid or voidable. Now let's talk about the case of Mrs. Alpha. Mrs. Alpha was in an abusive relationship with her husband, Mr. Alpha. She went to the bank to guarantee a loan of 1.5 million. Even though the bank advised her to get independent legal advice, she was forced to sign the loan guarantee by her husband, who had physically abused her. She had visible injuries when she visited the bank, and it was clear that she was under duress from her husband. Because of this pressure and fear of more violence, Mrs. Alpha signed the agreement. This situation clearly shows duress, as she didn't sign the contract freely or voluntarily. She was forced into it. The legal principle of duress is based on three key factors. One is pressure or threats. In Mrs. Alpha's case, her husband physically abused her, that is clearly qualifies as pressure. Number two, lack of free will. She was scared of more violence that she didn't feel she could refuse to sign the loan guarantee. And number three, voidable contract. Contracts under duress can be made voidable, meaning the court can cancel them. In Mrs. Alpha's case, the contract could be cancelled because her contract consent was not freely given. Now I want to talk about bank's responsibility. An important point to consider in this case is the role of the bank. The bank advised Mrs. Alpha to get legal advice, but they didn't do enough to protect her interest. When they saw her visible injuries and her husband's controlling presence, they should have taken more action to ensure she was signing freely. And the bank's failure to do so could be considered unconscionable conduct, which means taking unfair advantages of some in a vulnerable position. And now in conclusion, duress occurs when someone is forced into a contract because of threats or pressure. In the case of Mrs. Alpha, the physical abuse and the pressure from her husband forced her to sign a loan guarantee, which means the contract was formed under duress. Because of this, the contract is likely voidable, meaning she could ask the court to cancel it. The bank also failed in its duty to protect her, which could be considered unconscionable conduct. This case highlights the importance of making sure that people signing contracts freely and voluntarily without any pressures. Thank you.